alarm blared across the command deck of the Harbinger, shaking the crew from their routines. Commander Ethan Hale's sharp eyes darted over the flickering displays, scanning the readouts. The chaos unfolding before him wasn't a drill, but a nightmare. "Report," Hale barked, his voice cutting through the rising panic in the control room. "Colonial defenses are overwhelmed, sir." Lieutenant Mira Talvok's voice rang clear as she worked furiously at her console. "The Tsart fleet is attacking with full force. They've breached the outer perimeter." The cold metallic walls of the command center trembled with each impact as debris ricocheted off the Harbinger's hull. Hale gripped the armrests of his chair, a bitter taste rising in his throat. He stared out of the viewport at the devastating sight, the colony of New Eden burning. Waves of Tsart warships poured through the atmosphere, their sleek forms cutting through the smoke-filled skies like predators circling a wounded animal. "Helm, evasive maneuvers," Hale ordered, his tone tight with urgency. The ship's thrusters roared as the Harbinger lurched, dodging an incoming blast, but it was too late. The first wave of Tsart assault ships had already begun their descent. New Eden, humanity's last stronghold in the sector, was falling. "Commander, we're too far out," came the voice of Commander Alex Reese from the comms channel, barely audible over the static. "We're not in range to intercept them. All we can do is watch." Hale's hand tightened into a fist, slamming against the console. "Then we'll make sure they know we're still here." The Tsart Dominion, a ruthless empire built on centuries of conquests, had finally reached Earth's last line of defense. The humans had fought tooth and nail for every inch of ground, but they'd known it was only a matter of time before their fragile defenses shattered. What had once been a thriving colony was now a target, marked for destruction. But Hale wasn't going to let this be the end. Not like this. Not when there was still hope, barely. On the other side of the room, Lieutenant Talvok glanced up from her console, her face etched with the same resolve as Hale's. "Their bombardment is focused on the central city. We won't last long if we don't act quickly. But our weapons are still offline. We've only got thrusters left." "Can we do anything?" Hale asked, eyes fixed on the screens, watching the flames rise from the capital. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "We have our team. If we move fast, we can scramble a counterstrike, but it's risky. We don't have the luxury of hesitation," Hale snapped, standing up from his chair and pacing toward the viewport. "This is humanity's last stand. We fight, or we die." The ship shuddered once more, another blast shaking them to their core. A few crew members stumbled, but no one took their eyes off their stations. This wasn't the first time they'd been attacked, but it was certainly the worst. "Commander," Talvok said softly, "I have a team ready for insertion. We can try to strike back from within, sabotage their key targets, destabilize their fleet. But we need to make it count." Hale exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Do it. And get me a direct line to Reese. We need to coordinate." As Talvok barked orders to the team, Hale turned toward the view screen, watching the firestorms as they erupted over New Eden. The Tsart were already landing, their forces moving with eerie precision. The colony didn't stand a chance, not against such overwhelming firepower. For a moment, Hale felt the weight of the entire galaxy pressing down on his shoulders. His fingers tightened around the edge of the viewport as he watched the flames consume their last hope. New Eden had been their beacon, their home, a symbol of what humanity could achieve. And now it was nothing more than rubble. "All ships in the sector are retreating." Reese's voice crackled through the comms. "We can't hold them off. They're too powerful. It's over, Hale." "Not yet," Hale growled, turning away from the viewport. "This is just the beginning." His crew looked to him for answers. He could feel their eyes burning into him, every single one of them depending on him to get them through this. Hale didn't have a plan, not yet, but he would make one. He would find a way to make them regret underestimating humanity. He wouldn't let them die without a fight. Not on his watch. "Commander," Talvok said, her voice steady, "I've got the team ready for the mission. We can infiltrate their landing sites and start hitting them from the inside." Hale nodded. "Do it, and keep me posted on any developments. We're going to make sure they feel the weight of every last one of us." As Talvok left to prepare the strike team, Hale sank back into his chair. He couldn't afford to break. Not now. Not after all that had happened. A flash of red appeared on the viewport, signaling another Tsarit ship in orbit. Hale's gaze sharpened. If they were to survive this, it wouldn't be by relying on their traditional methods. It would take cunning. It would take human will. He clenched his fist again, his voice low but filled with cold determination. We'll make them regret this. We will strike back. We will make them remember that humanity doesn't die easily. The devastation continued outside, but Hale's mind was already racing toward a new strategy. This fight had just begun. The Tsart were ruthless, yes. But humanity had something they didn't. A refusal to give up, no matter the odds. For now they had to survive. But Hale knew, with an unshakable certainty, that they would not just survive. They would make the Tsart pay for every colony they had taken, for New Eden, for every human life lost, and for every inch of space they had ever claimed. They had underestimated humanity, that was their mistake. And humanity would make them pay for it. The blast doors slammed shut behind him with a metallic thud, sealing Hale away from the rest of the crew. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow. He stood there for a moment, taking in the silence that now dominated the Harbinger's command deck. The alarms had fallen quiet, and the aftershocks of the Tsart assault seemed to linger in the air, as though the chaos had somehow seeped into every corner of the ship. He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him like 1,000 tons of rock. New Eden was lost, and his crew, his people, were scattered, broken. He had been forced to make decisions he'd never thought he'd have to make, leading them into a fight they had no hope of winning. And yet, here they were. Hale ran a hand through his hair and walked to the viewport, staring out at the wreckage. The remnants of New Eden were barely visible from here, just a smudge of burning ruins. His mind replayed the moment he'd seen the colony go up in flames, the moments when he had felt completely powerless. His people had trusted him to protect them, and he had failed. He closed his eyes, letting the silence fill him. There was no time for grief, not yet. But the guilt gnawed at him. His duty had been clear. Protect the colony, protect humanity's future. Instead, they were left with nothing but the rubble of a once thriving world. Footsteps approached, and Hale turned to see Lieutenant Mira Talvok enter, her face a mask of resolve. She was the one person who hadn't flinched, even when the colony had crumbled. There was a fire in her eyes that mirrored his own, but for now, it was buried under layers of doubt. "We're all set for debriefing," she said, her voice steady but quiet. Hale didn't move. "I don't know how I'm supposed to face them, Mira. How do I tell them we've lost?" "You don't," she replied. "You tell them we fight back." He looked at her, a fleeting sense of gratitude pushing aside his frustration. "You've got more faith in me than I do right now." "That's my job," Talvok said with a dry smile. "Now, let's get to work." The debriefing room was dimly lit, a far cry from the chaos outside. The faces of his crew were hollow, their eyes distant. They were a diverse group, all survivors from different backgrounds, soldiers, scientists, engineers, civilians. Every one of them had lost something that day. Some had lost family, others had lost homes, entire histories erased in a matter of hours. Hale's own heart twisted at the thought of the family he'd left behind on Earth, the world he'd sworn to protect. He cleared his throat, trying to push the weight of his emotions aside. He could feel their eyes on him, eyes filled with a mix of fear, anger, and desperate hope. It was his responsibility now to channel that energy into something that could defeat the Tsart. "I know this feels impossible," Hale began, his voice calm but filled with the gravity of the situation. "New Eden is gone. We've lost an entire colony, and it feels like everything we've worked for is slipping through our fingers. But I'm telling you now, we are not done." A murmur ran through the room, but Hale raised his hand, silencing them. "I know you've lost people. I know you're afraid. We all are. But fear won't win this fight. What will win this fight is what the Tsarth don't understand. It's the human spirit. our ability to adapt, to improvise, and to strike when it seems like there's no hope. He paused, scanning the room, meeting their eyes one by one. We don't have their technology. We don't have their fleets. But we have something stronger. We have each other. We're not going to play by their rules. We're going to fight differently. A young ensign raised her hand. How, Commander? How do we fight back when we're outnumbered, outgunned? Hale sighed, walking to the table in the center of the room. He ran his fingers over the edges of a tablet, the data flashing before his eyes, and he saw a new path emerging from the fog of despair. We fight with our minds, he said, the words more certain than he felt. We make them doubt us. We use their arrogance against them. They think we're weak because we don't have their weapons. But that's where they're wrong. They think we're a threat they can wipe out easily, but we're going to prove them wrong. He looked at Talbot, who nodded, understanding the shift in his plan. We'll sabotage their communications, disrupt their supply lines. We'll make them fight a war they're not prepared for. We'll hit them where they least expect it. The crew was silent for a moment, but slowly their expressions shifted from disbelief to determination. Hale could feel it in the room, the first stirrings of resolve. Commander, one of the engineers, a middle-aged man named Harris, spoke up, his voice hesitant but hopeful. We've been working on a few things. You might want to see them. Hale nodded, motioning for the team to follow him. The engineers had been tinkering with whatever tech they could salvage from New Eden, repurposing old systems and inventing new ones. It wasn't much, but it was something. They entered the workshop, a dimly lit room filled with the scent of metal and oil. Harris and the others were gathered around a series of makeshift weapons, improvised explosive devices, hacking equipment, and various devices that looked more like the remnants of human ingenuity than military-grade tech. We've got a few things we can work with, Harris continued, his voice growing more confident. It's not much, but it's a start. We can begin using their own systems against them. Hale walked around the table, studying each piece of equipment. It was far from ideal, but it was a glimmer of something. It was their chance. It would have to be enough. This is our way forward, Hale said, feeling the weight of his responsibility. We fight smarter. We take back what's ours. We make sure that when the Tsart look at us, they know they've made a grave mistake. As they prepared, Hale's thoughts shifted back to Earth. He thought about the life he had left behind, the calm, the routine, the expectations. Those days felt like another lifetime. Now, every decision he made carried the lives of his people with it. There was no going back, not anymore. He pulled off his watch, the one he had worn for years, and stared at it for a long moment. It was a gift from his father, a reminder of a time when things had been simpler. He'd never intended to part with it, but now, it felt like a weight around his wrist. This is a different kind of war, Hale muttered, slipping the watch into his pocket. We'll make them regret ever stepping foot in our galaxy. As the crew set to work, Hale stood silently at the back of the room, watching them prepare for the fight ahead. It wasn't much, but it was everything. And it would be enough. They were not just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for something more. Something that could change the course of their future. The hum of the Harbinger's engines was faint against the overwhelming silence that had settled over the ship. Inside the briefing room, a heavy air of uncertainty lingered, a sense that the weight of their survival now depended on one question. Could they break the Tsart's stranglehold before it was too late? Hale stood at the front of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of his crew. The glimmer of hope that had started to take root in their hearts was still fragile, like a flame in the wind. They had taken their first steps in the war for survival, but now the real fight was beginning. We've got no more time to waste, Hale said, his voice low but sharp. We've located a weak point in their operations, a supply convoy moving from one of their backwater colonies to the front lines. It's heavily guarded, but it's also vital to their fleet's success. We're going to hit them where it hurts. Lieutenant Talbot looked up from the map, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. If we take out their supply chain, it'll disrupt their operations on the ground and in space. But we'll need to be fast and precise. They'll notice us the moment we make a move. We don't plan to give them that luxury, Hale replied, his tone unwavering. We're not fighting a conventional war anymore. We're fighting in the shadows. The crew exchanged nervous glances. They knew this mission could very well end their lives, but they also knew it was the only chance they had. For the first time, they felt like they had a shot at something more than just surviving. They could strike back. The plan was simple but dangerous. Hale's team, along with human intelligence officers, would infiltrate a Tsard supply convoy, infiltrate their communication lines, and disable their fleet's ability to coordinate. A direct strike wasn't an option. They'd be outnumbered and outgunned. They needed to be ghosts in the machine, operating where the enemy couldn't see them. A mix of hacking, sabotage, and precision strikes would be their only weapon. The tension in the room was palpable as Hale outlined the operation, breaking down the key roles. Talvok would lead the team on the ground while Hale would focus on intercepting the Tsart's communications from the Harbinger. Once we infiltrate their supply convoy, we'll plant a data virus to take down their communication network, Hale said. It'll give us the upper hand in this fight. But the key will be getting to their data drives before they can scramble their forces. We're not just hitting their supplies, Talvok added, her voice steady. We're hitting their entire communication structure. Without it, they'll be blind. Exactly, Hale confirmed. And once we take them out, they'll be scrambling to regain control while we strike at their weaker targets. With the plan set, Hale's crew prepared. There was no room for hesitation now. The war was no longer a matter of brute strength. It was about exploiting their enemies' weaknesses and using their own arrogance against them. Hours later, the Harbinger lurched as they exited hyperspace near the Tsart's supply route. The mission was set into motion. Talvok's team suited up in their light armor, and Hale watched as the crew moved with precision, the tension in their eyes replaced by a quiet focus. They knew what they had to do, but there was no denying the gravity of their mission. This was more than just a fight. It was a test of everything humanity stood for. We'll board the Tsar's convoy and set up the hacking equipment, Talvok said, adjusting her helmet. Once we're inside, we disable their sensors and communications. We won't need long, but we need to be fast. Hale nodded. I'll be on standby, monitoring their fleet's movements. I'll give you the signal once you've got access. The team filed into the shuttle, their faces hard with resolve. The shuttle lifted off, cutting through the dark vacuum of space toward the convoy. Hale's eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching as the data fed in from the mission's first steps. The tension in his chest tightened, but he pushed it aside. His crew was capable. This was their time. The shuttle's descent was flawless, skimming low over the Tsart convoy's outer ships. The convoy was a well-oiled machine. Tsart warships, supply freighters, and escort fighters all coordinated under one seamless command. Talvok and her team moved quickly, infiltrating one of the freighters that was carrying the most valuable supplies. The mission was already underway, but Hale had his doubts. Even though they had infiltrated the convoy undetected, there was always the possibility that the Tsart might notice their presence. But as the minutes stretched on and Talvok's team moved deeper into the convoy, Hale allowed himself a fleeting moment of hope. Status update, Talvok, Hale's voice crackled through the comms. We're inside, Talvok's voice replied, cutting through the static. Starting the hack now. The shuttle flew alongside the convoy as Hale worked furiously, linking into the Tsart communication system through a series of makeshift connections. His fingers danced over the control panel, working with the precision that only years of military training could instill. He had a few minutes, just enough time to cripple the Tsart's entire network. Almost there, Hale muttered to himself, eyes glued to the screen. A sense of quiet triumph began to build in his chest. They were going to pull this off. They were going to strike first. Suddenly, an explosion tore through the comm. The Tsart had detected something. The comms flickered, and Hale's heart skipped a beat. Talvok, Hale shouted into the comms. What the hell happened? We've been compromised, came Talvok's urgent reply. The Tsart are waking up. We need to finish the hack now. The air in the command room went thick with tension. Hale slammed his fist onto the console as the countdown continued. His crew was in danger, and they couldn't afford to lose them now. Just a few more seconds, Hale muttered under his breath, working with frantic energy. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Finally, with a crackle of static, the communications systems across the Tsart convoy went dark. "We've done it," Hale said, breathless with relief. "Not yet," Talbot's voice came back, sounding strained. "They've launched a counterattack. We need to leave, now." The shuttle blasted off from the freighter, the thrusters pushing them into space. The convoy's fighters scrambled, but without their command network they were disorganized. Talbot's team had disabled the key components, leaving the Tsart fleet blind. Hale exhaled, leaning back in his seat. They had done it. They had struck the first blow. The Tsart were crippled, their communications shattered. "Get us back to the Harbinger," Hale ordered. "This war is just beginning." The ship veered off toward safety, but Hale knew this was only the first step. They had done what no one thought they could do: disrupt the Tsart's communications and cripple their supply line. And with each victory, they were sending a message. Humanity would no longer lie in the shadows of the galaxy. The Harbinger had barely cleared the convoy when Hale's mind was already racing with the implications of their success. The Tsart were reeling from the loss of their communications, their supply chains severed. The immediate response from the alien fleet was one of chaos. But Hale knew this wouldn't last. They would adapt quickly, and when they did, they would come for him with everything they had. "Reese, what's the status on their response?" Hale called out, his gaze locked onto the tactical map displayed before him. Commander Reese's voice crackled through the comms, strained but focused. "We're seeing a lot of scrambling, Commander. They're regrouping faster than we anticipated. It won't be long before they figure out what happened. Keep pushing them. Hit their weak points while they're still disoriented." Hale's voice was sharp, his mind already planning the next move. "We need to disrupt their leadership next." Far away, in the heart of the Tsart fleet's command vessel, General Zan Zorath stood before a series of shattered communication screens, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. His once pristine war room was now littered with data feeds, flashing red alerts and fragmented reports from the shattered systems. "This is impossible," Zorth growled, pacing in front of the shattered display. "How could they have infiltrated us so easily? Who is leading this insurrection?" His officers stood in silence, unwilling to meet his gaze. Their once proud empire, built on ruthless superiority and technological dominance, was unraveling before their eyes. The humans, those insignificant creatures, had managed to breach their systems with shocking efficiency. The thought was anathema to everything that Tsart believed in. It must have some form of advanced technology, one of his commanders ventured cautiously, his voice trembling slightly. "We need to find and eliminate the source before it spreads further." Zorath's eyes narrowed, the familiar fury bubbling beneath the surface. "I want their leaders found. I want them dead. But most importantly," he paused, his voice turning icy, "I want to make an example of them. Humanity's arrogance must be punished." He slammed his fist onto the console, causing the officers to flinch. "We will crush them. This was nothing more than a fleeting victory. They are playing in the dark. Soon they will know what it means to face the full force of the Dominion." Back aboard the Harbinger, Hale stood over the communications table, eyes fixed on the flashing map. The Tsart were indeed reacting faster than anticipated. They had sent ships to intercept the human fleet, and there was no question now. This was going to escalate. "Mira," Hale said, turning to Lieutenant Talvok, "we need to hit them where it hurts. We've crippled their comms once, but we need to do more. We've found their central command hub, and we have the intel on their communications. It's time we strike at their heart." Talvok nodded, her face a mixture of determination and quiet anxiety. "You want us to infiltrate their flagship?" "We're not waiting for them to come to us," Hale replied, his voice steely. "We're taking the fight to them. If we can sever their command network completely, we'll cripple their ability to fight back." The mission was set into motion almost immediately. The Harbinger slipped into the shadows of space, just beyond the range of Tsar sensors, as Hale's crew prepped for the most dangerous phase of their plan. They would infiltrate the heart of the Tsar fleet, target their central command facility, and once again disrupt their communications system. Hale's mind was already working on the next stage. If they could cut off the Tsart's remaining ability to organize, they might have a shot at not just surviving, but winning. Meanwhile, Zorath stood at the helm of his flagship, glaring at the remaining communication data coming through. He could feel the pressure mounting. His fleet was still reeling, but the humans had become bolder. They weren't hiding anymore. They were taking the fight to his doorstep. "General, we've detected an anomaly," one of his officers called from across the room, breaking Zorath's focus. "The human ship Harbinger has entered our proximity. They're attempting another strike." Zorath's heart raced with anger. "They think they can challenge the Dominion? They will regret this. Order the fleet to prepare for battle. We will eradicate this vermin once and for all." But as the Tsart scrambled to mobilize, doubt began to creep into their ranks. Their ships, once precise and coordinated, began to show signs of disarray. Their communications were still patchy, and the reports coming in were fragmented at best. They couldn't communicate effectively, couldn't coordinate the defense. The human attacks were having a more profound effect than Zorth had anticipated. The infiltration team boarded their shuttle, moving swiftly and silently through the Tsart flagship's corridors. Talvok led the charge, her eyes focused, her team close behind. Their mission was clear: reach the heart of the enemy command center and plant the virus that would sever their communication lines once again. As they moved deeper into the Tsart ship, Hale remained back aboard the Harbinger, coordinating their progress. His fingers danced across the console, feeding them the intel they needed, navigating them through the labyrinth of alien corridors and systems. 10 minutes to target," Talvok's voice crackled through the comms. "We're almost there, just keep their defenses distracted." Hale's eyes narrowed as the flashing red alerts on his screen intensified. The Tsart were realizing the depth of their vulnerability. They were disorganized, and the counterattacks they launched were coming too late. Humanity was already one step ahead. Inside the Tsart command center, Zorath seethed with rage. His fleet was failing, his ships were scattered, and his command hub was under assault. The humans had infiltrated again, and this time, they were targeting the core of his operations. "This cannot happen," Zorath hissed. "I will not be outwitted by these vermin. Launch a full-scale counterattack. Bring everything to bear on the Harbinger." His voice crackled with frustration as the Tsart began to mobilize. But it was already too late. The damage had been done. Talbok's team reached the command center, the final steps of their mission drawing closer. With swift precision, they deployed the virus into the Tsart's central data hub. The virus spread like wildfire, corrupting their communication systems, severing their ability to coordinate. "We've done it," Talbok's voice came through, a sense of quiet satisfaction in her tone. "The Tsart are blind." With that, the team made their retreat, leaving the Tsart fleet in chaos. Zorth's forces were now crippled. His attempts at retaliation were disorganized and futile. The psychological damage had been done. The Tsart had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they would pay the price. Back on the Harbinger, Hale exhaled deeply. They had struck a decisive blow, but this battle was far from over. The Tsart were reeling, but they would strike back. Hale knew that now, more than ever, they had to stay one step ahead. "The first blow is ours," Hale said to his crew, his voice filled with quiet determination. "But this is just the beginning. We make them pay for every inch of ground they've taken. We'll never give up." As the Tsart struggled to regain control, the humans prepared for the next move. The war had only just begun, and now, with the Dominion's arrogance exposed, humanity had the upper hand. The Tsart fleet, once unchallenged and confident in its supremacy, had begun to fray at the edges. The humans' relentless strikes had shaken their command structure, leaving the alien forces disjointed and on the back foot, but Hale knew the worst was yet to come. The Tsart were not going to sit idly by. They would fight back with everything they had, and they were coming for New Eden. And the hum of the Harbinger's engines filled the command deck as Hale surveyed the tactical map, his eyes scanning the movement of enemy ships. The Tsart had regrouped, They were launching a counteroffensive to retake the colony. And this time, they weren't going to make the same mistakes. "Commander, we're getting readings from their flagship," Lieutenant Talvok's voice broke through his thoughts. "They're mobilizing for a full assault. This will be their biggest push yet." Hale's heart tightened, but his face remained steady. "They think they can take it all back with force. Let's make sure they learn how wrong they are." A tactical officer, one of the survivors from New Eden, piped in. "They've already breached the outer defenses of the colony. We have no time left. They'll be here within the hour." Hale looked out of the viewport, his eyes tracing the trajectory of the Tsar fleet. New Eden, his home, was still out there, waiting for salvation. But Hale knew that what they were about to do would carry consequences far beyond the destruction of this invasion. They weren't just defending the colony anymore. They were fighting for the future. "It's time," Hale muttered under his breath, his gaze hardening. "We hit them where it hurts." The Harbinger was already making its approach toward the Tsart fleet, its engines kicking into high gear as they prepared for the final push. Hale knew this wouldn't be a battle of brute strength. They couldn't match the Tsart ship for ship, fleet for fleet. But they had something that Tsart didn't: ingenuity. Humanity's greatest weapon was their ability to think outside the box, to exploit weaknesses others missed, and that's exactly what they were about to do. "Deploy the virus," Hale ordered, turning to the tech officers who had been preparing the final strike. The human ingenuity they had weaponized into the virus was now their final weapon against the Zart's bloodline. The virus had been designed to corrupt the Zart's genetic databases, rendering them incapable of reproduction, ensuring that their species would not survive this conflict. A technician nodded grimly and began the sequence. A series of rapid, urgent keystrokes filled the room, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. "It's live," the technician announced. On the Zart flagship, General Zorath paced back and forth, his rage evident. Every hour they spent fighting these humans was another hour wasted, another piece of their empire slipping away. But this time, he would crush them. He would make them pay for the humiliation they had caused. Zorath muttered to his commanders, his voice tinged with contempt. "We will annihilate them. This is their final stand." But as the hours ticked by and his fleet moved closer to New Eden, a wave of unease washed over him. His commanders were quiet, their focus fractured. Their ships, once precise in their movements, now drifted like rudderless vessels, confused and disjointed. He had never seen his fleet so disorganized. "Send the order," Zorath demanded, his impatience growing. No more delays, full assault on the human fleet, now. But even as the words left his mouth, something felt wrong. The communication systems, which had always been his greatest strength, were failing. Static buzzed over the comms, the messages from his officers fragmented, indecipherable. "No," Zorath whispered, his eyes narrowing. "It's happening again." The human fleet, while outgunned, had a distinct advantage. They were faster, smarter, and more adaptable. Hale had prepared them for this moment, and they weren't going to back down. As the Tsar closed in on New Eden, the humans hit them with everything they had, scrambling their communications, disabling their weapon systems, and causing chaos within the Tsar ranks. Hale's voice rang out through the comms. "This is the turning point. They can't fight back when they don't know what we're doing. Hit their weak points, and hit them hard." Inside the Tsart flagship, Zorath's frustration boiled over as the ship's systems continued to fail. His fleet, once the pinnacle of military precision, was becoming an incoherent mess. The humans had struck at the heart of his command, disrupting his ability to coordinate his forces, and now he was facing the harsh reality. His fleet was blind, disorganized, and vulnerable. "General," one of his officers stammered, fear creeping into their voice. "We've lost full contact with our fleet. We can't get through to them." Zorath clenched his fists, his mind racing. How? How are they doing this? We've already given them everything we have." And then it hit him. There was only one explanation: the virus. They had deployed it. The humans had weaponized the very thing he held sacred, their bloodline. His mind reeled at the thought of it. If the virus took full effect, the Zart would cease to exist. The thought of such an outcome was unbearable, but the truth was clear. The humans had just launched a devastating strike against his people's future. "No," Zorath hissed. "They cannot get away with this. We will crush them." But even as he spoke, the reality set in. His command was lost. His future, his species' future, was slipping through his fingers. He had underestimated the humans. The final push came swiftly. Hale's fleet, now emboldened by their success, moved in unison to strike at the heart of the Zart fleet. As Zorath scrambled to regain control, the humans closed in, using their precise knowledge of the Zart's weaknesses to dismantle their remaining forces. "Now," Hale ordered, his voice cool and calculated, "this is the moment we've been fighting for." The Harbinger's cannons opened fire, but it wasn't the blast that mattered. The real strike had already taken place. The virus had done its work. The Zart, unable to reproduce, were already in the process of undoing their own existence. The humans had not just won a battle, they had delivered a devastating blow to the very heart of the Tsar Empire. On the Zart flagship, Zorath stood at the edge of the command deck, staring out at the battlefield. His fleet was scattered, disbanded, and in complete disarray. His once proud empire was on the brink of extinction, and it was all because of a species he had once thought beneath him. He gritted his teeth. The Zart would never recover from this. Not after what the humans had done. But as the last of the Zart forces disintegrated into the void, Hale allowed himself a quiet breath. They had done it. The Zart were no more. Their arrogance, their belief in their own superiority, had been their undoing. Humanity had struck back, and they had done it with a precision that would make the Zart remember their names for eternity. "The battle is ours," Hale said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "But the war is far from over." As the remnants of the Zart fleet vanished into the blackness, Hale knew that humanity's greatest challenge was still ahead. But for now, they had won. And that was enough to give them hope for the future. The once proud Tsar Dominion, a colossal empire that had bent countless civilizations to its will, was crumbling. The loss of their future, the eradication of their bloodline, had been more devastating than any weapon humanity could wield. It was not just defeat. It was an extinction-level blow, a wound so deep that nothing could heal it. On the command deck of the Zart flagship, General Zalak stood frozen, staring at the shattered communications screens in front of him. The war had been lost. The human virus had spread too fast, too thoroughly. His race, once the most powerful in the galaxy, had been reduced to nothing more than a dying relic, its future wiped from existence. Commander Zeluk, one of his officers, spoke, but the words sounded hollow, as if they carried no weight anymore. "Our forces are disintegrating. We've lost contact with most of the fleet. What should we do?" Zaluk's hands clenched into fists, his claws digging into the cold metal of the command station. His mind raced, but it felt as if the air itself was suffocating him. There was no escape from the truth. The Zart were finished. "Send a message to the remaining fleets," Zaluk said, his voice heavy with the weight of finality. "Tell them to retreat to the last known Zart strongholds. It's over." The officer hesitated, as if unsure of what he had just heard. "Retreat, sir? But the humans—" Zaluk's gaze turned cold, his eyes narrowing in anger. "There's nowhere left to run. We can't even reproduce anymore. There's no empire left to command. Just do it." The officer nodded, turning to relay the order, but there was no fire in his movement. None of them had any fight left in them. The Zart had been beaten, and deep within their hearts, they all knew it. In the dark void of space, the final remnants of the Zart fleet were being picked apart by the relentless advance of the human forces. The Harbinger led the charge, its cannons firing with precision as the Zart ships, once a symbol of unstoppable might, now struggled to mount any kind of defense. The virus had shattered their communications and disorganized their fleets, leaving them vulnerable to the humans' calculated strikes. "Commander Hale?" We've isolated their command ship. Talbot's voice rang out over the comms. The Zart flagship is all that's left. Bring us in, Hale ordered, his voice steady, but there was no mistaking the resolve in it. They were about to end this war, to erase the last remnants of the Tsar dominion once and for all. On the Zart flagship, Zarlok's thoughts swirled with despair. The loss of New Eden, the failure of his fleets, and the annihilation of his species' future. It was all too much to bear. His entire existence had been built around the idea of Zart's supremacy. Now, that very idea had been shattered, obliterated by a species he had long deemed inferior. The virus had destroyed his people's future, and with it his legacy. There would be no more conquests, no more bloodlines to carry on their rule. The Tsar would die here, forgotten, erased from the stars. General, a trembling officer called from across the room. The human fleet is closing in. We have no remaining resources to defend ourselves. Zalok's chest tightened. I will not go down like this. His claws dug into the surface of his console, his thoughts racing. He had one last option, a final stand. It would be a futile gesture, but perhaps it would grant him the dignity of choosing his own fate. Prepare the self-destruct sequence, Zalok ordered, his voice like a growl. We'll take them down with us. The Harbinger was closing in. Hale stood at the helm, his mind already focused on the next phase of the operation. The Zart were all but finished, but he knew there was still one final confrontation to be had. Their flagship had been the center of their power, and it was now reduced to a target, a broken symbol of the empire that once ruled the galaxy. Incoming fire, Talbot reported from the tactical station. They're trying to take us down with them. The human fleet was closing in on the Zart flagship. Hale watched as their guns fired, but the shots were weak, uncoordinated. It was clear that Zart had lost their will to fight. They were running on fumes, scrambling for a way to salvage something from their defeat. All ships, prepare to disable the Zart flagship, Hale commanded, his voice calm but firm. We end this now. The Harbinger moved in with precise maneuvering, flanking the Zart flagship as its weapon systems flickered in and out of power. The human fleet fired in perfect harmony, neutralizing the Zart's remaining defenses. Inside the Zart flagship, Zalok stood before his officers, his face a mask of fury and resignation. The self-destruct sequence was in place, but it was too late. The human fleet had already broken through, and the Zart flagship was on the verge of collapse. Zalok knew he would not have the honor of going down in battle. Instead, he would be remembered as the general who failed to protect his people, the leader who allowed an entire empire to fall. As the final blow struck, the lights on the Zart flagship flickered and died, signaling the end. The ship's systems failed, and the once proud vessel began to crumble under the weight of its own failure. The Zart had no future. Their empire had died with the loss of New Eden, and now their last stronghold was gone. On the Harbinger, Hale watched as the Zart flagship's destruction unfolded before him. There was no celebration, no relief. Only silence. The humans had won, but it was a hollow victory. The cost of this war had been steep. Their victory had come at the price of millions of lives, both human and Zart. We've done it, Talbot said quietly, breaking the silence. Hale didn't answer right away. He knew the humans had struck a decisive blow, but the emotional toll of what they had done weighed heavily on him. The Zart were no more. Their bloodline had been erased. There would be no more conquest, no more war. They had wiped out an entire species. Hale turned away from the viewport, his voice low. We've won, but at what cost? There was a quiet pause as the crew took in the finality of their victory. They had destroyed the Zart's future, and in doing so, they had ensured their own. Humanity would live on, but the price was one they would have to carry with them. We'll rebuild, Hale said, his voice gaining strength. We'll carry on. We've earned that right. As the Harbinger turned away from the burning wreckage of the Zart flagship, Hale knew they had sealed their future. The Zart were gone, and their reign had ended. Now humanity would rebuild. But the memory of this victory, and the cost it had come with, would stay with them forever. The silence on the Harbinger was suffocating. The victorious hum of the engines had been replaced with a heavy stillness that settled over the crew like an oppressive weight. The Tsart fleet was gone, completely wiped out, scattered into the void like the shattered remnants of a once proud empire. Yet, for all the triumph of their victory, there was no celebratory cheer, no cheers of victory, just the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the weight of what had been lost. Commander Ethan Hale stood at the front of the command deck, his eyes tracing the distant remnants of the Tsart fleet as it drifted helplessly in space. Their once mighty ships were now ghostly silhouettes, their advanced weaponry and relentless drive reduced to lifeless husks. A victory, humanity had secured it, but the price had been high, and Hale could feel it deep within him. The ghosts of those who had fallen weighed heavily on his mind. "Commander," Lieutenant Miratalvok's voice interrupted his reverie, breaking the silence but not the heaviness that lingered. "The last of their ships have been destroyed. We've done it." Hale didn't reply immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the debris fields of the Tsart fleet, his mind far from the celebratory tone in Talvok's voice. The Harbinger slowly began its course, leaving the remnants of the Tsart fleet behind. The once feared empire had crumbled in a matter of days, and yet, the triumph felt hollow. "Yeah, we've done it," Hale replied, his voice flat, distant. "But at what cost?" He could hear the unspoken question hanging in the air. What had it cost them? Thousands of lives, human and alien, had been lost in the struggle. Millions of innocent Tsart had perished, and so had countless humans. This victory, hard-earned and costly, had taken more from them than anyone could measure. It wasn't the kind of victory that came with celebrations. It was a victory forged in the ashes of what had been lost. Inside the crew quarters, the somber mood was palpable. Hale walked among the survivors, his footsteps muffled against the cold metal floors. The crew, once full of hope, now wore the scars of their battle. They had won, but their faces were etched with exhaustion, loss, and the toll of war. As he walked through the narrow corridors, he saw the quiet conversations that had replaced the once lively chatter of the crew. The women and men who had once been hopeful were now wearied by the immense weight of their survival. The joy of victory had not come. Instead, there was only the profound silence of those who had been through the fire and emerged battered but alive. Hale stopped in front of the mess hall, where the rest of the crew had gathered. Their eyes followed him as he entered, the faces he had known for years, some of them with families back on Earth, others who had come from distant colonies, now looked at him with a shared understanding. The war was over. The Tsart were gone. But the cost was something none of them would ever be able to escape. He climbed onto the small platform at the front of the room, where a simple screen displayed the wreckage of the Tsart fleet. "We did it," Hale said, his voice raspy, as he stood before his crew, the weight of his words heavy in the air. "The Tsart are gone. Their empire is finished. They'll never rise again. But it comes at a cost." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had fought beside him. "We've lost so much. So many of our people, our friends, our families. The price of this war, this victory, is beyond what any of us could have imagined." A quiet murmur rippled through the room, but no one interrupted him. They were listening, understanding. "We took down an entire empire. But we're not just left with their ashes. We're left with the scars. We will carry them with us, every one of us. The lives we've lost, the sacrifices we've made, they're a part of who we are now." Hale's gaze shifted toward the back of the room, where Lieutenant Tavlok stood, her arms crossed, her expression stoic. She was one of the few who hadn't spoken since the battle ended. Hale knew her well enough to understand that the weight of the victory was just as crushing to her as it was to him. They had been on this journey together from the beginning, and now they would both bear the consequences of this war, together. "I don't know what happens next," Hale continued, "but I do know this. We've secured a future for humanity. We've beaten the Tsart, and we will rebuild. We will honor those we've lost by making sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain. There was no applause, no cheers, but as Hale looked across the room, he saw a quiet resolve in the eyes of his crew. They had fought for this moment. They had given everything for this future. The Harbinger drifted in space, far from the wreckage of the Tart fleet, toward Earth. The journey would take months, but the crew had already begun to plan for what would come next. What remained of the Tart fleet was nothing more than debris, scattered across the galaxy. The victory was complete. And yet, the humans aboard the Harbinger couldn't escape the deep, aching knowledge that the cost had been immense. Hale stood by the viewport once more, watching as the stars stretched out before him, the empty void now a symbol of the Zart's absence. The darkness that had once been filled with the threat of their empire now felt empty, like a scar left on the universe. The T-Zart were gone, but at what cost? Hale turned away from the viewport, his thoughts weighed down by the loss. It wasn't just the human lives that had been lost, it was the future. The T-Zart had been a threat to humanity, but they had been a part of the galaxy too. With their fall, a balance had been lost, one that would never be restored. Kalvok's voice cut through the silence, pulling him from his thoughts. "We're almost there. Earth is in sight." Hale nodded, but his mind remained far from the home they were heading to. "Tell the crew to prepare. When we return, it's not just a victory we'll be facing. It's the aftermath. The future we've secured will require everything we've got." As the Harbinger sailed on, slowly but steadily, Hale knew that this victory would be remembered for generations. But it would also be a reminder of the toll war exacted. Humanity had fought hard for their survival, and now they had to find a way to heal. The Zart were gone. Humanity had won. But at what cost? That was the question they would all carry with them into the future. For now, however, there was just the quiet, empty void in front of them, and the slow, steady march back home. The Harbinger drifted into Earth's orbit, its hull battered, the once pristine ship now carrying the scars of an unrelenting war. The crew was quiet as they approached their home, each person lost in their own thoughts, reflecting on what had been sacrificed and what lay ahead. The Zart had been eradicated, their empire shattered, but the victory had come at a cost that would forever be etched into the hearts and minds of those who had fought for it. Commander Ethan Hale stood at the viewport, his eyes focused on the pale blue orb below. Earth, the place they had fought to protect, the cradle of humanity's survival. The planet was still alive, still spinning, but there was no denying that everything had changed. "Commander," Talvok's voice broke the silence, her words gentle but firm. "We're home." Hale's gaze lingered for a moment longer, but he didn't respond right away. Home. The word felt heavier than it ever had before. There was a time when Earth had seemed like a place of certainty, where the future was clear, and the only thing they had to worry about was what lay ahead in the next day. But now, the future was anything but certain. They had won, but the path forward was unknown. It was theirs to shape, and that responsibility weighed heavily on him. "Have the crew prepare for debriefing," Hale said finally, turning away from the viewport. "This isn't over. Not yet." The crew gathered in the mess hall, the same faces from the battle that had endured so much now returned to Earth. They had seen what no one should ever have to see, fought battles no one should have fought, and lost things that could never be regained. But they were still here. They had survived. They had won. Hale stood at the front of the room, his expression solemn. He had spent the last few hours going over the reports and evaluating the damage, not just to the Harbinger, but to everything they had known. The war had been brutal, the cost had been astronomical. But the people of Earth had shown something that the Zart could never understand. A refusal to be broken, a refusal to give up, and now, standing at the threshold of peace, Hale had one final speech to give to those who had made this victory possible. "We've made it," Hale began, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of everything that had come before. "We've erased the Zart from existence, and we've secured our future. But this victory isn't just ours. It's the future of every generation that comes after us. We've fought for them, for those who will never have to face the kind of horrors we've lived through. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. But we also have to face the truth of what we've done. The Zard are gone, and there's no coming back for them. We've destroyed a species. And while that was necessary, it doesn't change the fact that we've taken a life that we can never give back. The cost of this war, of this victory, is something we will carry with us forever. The room was silent, the gravity of his words settling in. No one spoke. But they didn't need to. They all understood. They had won. But the victory had not come without sacrifice. We've been through hell, Hale continued, his voice growing firmer, and we've come out on the other side stronger. But this is just the beginning. We can't let the cost of this war define us. We have to rebuild. We have to show that humanity is more than just the sum of our battles. We are a species that adapts, that survives, that overcomes, and now we have to lead the way for those who come after us. Later, as the Harbinger entered the atmosphere, the crew gathered on the observation deck, looking out at the Earth below. The sun had just risen over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the planet. The land, once scarred by war, now seemed peaceful in the morning light. But the scars would remain. There was no escaping the truth of what had happened, what had been lost, and what had been earned. Hale stood beside Tal Vok, both of them silent for a long moment, watching the Earth they had fought so hard to save. "It's strange," Hale said quietly. "We've won, but it doesn't feel like a victory. Not in the way I imagined it." Tal Vok nodded. "The price of victory is never what you expect, but we made it through. We saved Earth. We saved humanity." Hale turned to her, his expression softer now. "Yeah, we did. And we're going to make sure it was worth it." The Harbinger touched down gently, its engines winding down as it came to a stop. The crew disembarked, stepping onto Earth's soil for the first time in what felt like years. The air was different here, familiar, but carrying with it a new sense of purpose. The world they returned to was not the same world they had left. The Tsart were no longer a threat, but their legacy still lingered in the hearts of those who had survived. Humanity had won, but the true work was just beginning. Rebuilding wouldn't be easy. Trust had been shattered, and the scars of war ran deep, but Hale knew one thing for certain. Humanity had proven something. They had proven that no matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how dire the odds, humanity could rise, they could overcome. Hale walked slowly through the quiet streets, the morning sun warming his face. He looked around at the ruins of New Eden, still smoldering in some parts, but with signs of life slowly returning. The first steps of rebuilding. There was no denying the weight of what had happened, but there was hope too. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough. The war was over. The Zart were no more. Humanity stood victorious. But it wasn't just the Zart they had defeated. They had defeated despair. They had defeated their own limitations. And they had won a future for those who would come after them. As Hale reached the top of the hill that overlooked the colony, he looked out over the land, the sun now fully risen. The world felt different now, richer, fuller, as if the very air had changed. The Zart were gone. Their empire had fallen. The universe would never be the same. And humanity, scarred and battered as they were, had proven that they could survive anything. This was their legacy. The legacy of those who refused to be broken. The legacy of humanity. "We made it," Hale whispered to no one in particular, a quiet smile forming on his lips. "And now, we rebuild." The sun rose higher, casting its light over New Eden, over Earth, and over humanity's future. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in a long while, it seemed like there was hope. There was a future, and humanity had earned it. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more epic HFY tales where humanity rises against all odds, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your friends, subscribe to the channel for more incredible adventures, and comment below with your thoughts. What do you think humanity's greatest strength is? Let's keep the discussion going.